Jack Elam truly hated him more than anyone. Jack Elam was born William Scott. Elam, on November 13, 1920, in Miami, Arizona, was one of Hollywood's most recognizable and unforgettable character actors. From his earliest years, Elam showed an interest in storytelling and performance, traits that would later define his long and illustrious career in film and television. After serving in the United States Navy during World War II, where he developed a sense of discipline and resilience, he pursued a career in acting, studying at the University of Southern California. Elam's striking physical appearance, particularly his distinct misaligned eye, initially set him apart in the world of Hollywood. Rather than seeing it as a disadvantage, he turned it into a hallmark of his persona, creating a naturally menacing or quirky presence that became his trademark on screen. Elam's career spanned over 5 decades, during which he appeared in more than 200 film and television roles. He became especially famous for his work in westerns, a genre that seemed almost tailor-made for his rugged, unconventional look and commanding presence. Films such as Once Upon a Time in the West, 1968, Support Your Local Sheriff, 1969, and The Night of the Grizzly, 1966, cemented his reputation as the quintessential bad guy, though Elam often brought a unique mix of menace and humor to his characters. Audiences were drawn not just to his villainous roles, but also to the subtle humanity he occasionally infused into them, making him a deeply memorable presence in every story he graced. Beyond his work in westerns, Jack Elam displayed remarkable versatility, moving effortlessly between genres. He appeared in comedies, dramas, and even family-friendly films, proving that his talent could transcend typecasting. His collaborations with other iconic actors and directors of his era showcased his professionalism and the respect he garnered in the industry. Elam's appearances on television were equally prolific, including roles in series such as Gunsmoke, Bonanza, The Twilight Zone, and The Lone Ranger, where he left an indelible mark on American pop culture. In 1974 to 1975, Jack Elam took on the role of Zach Wheeler in The Texas Wheelers, a short-lived but memorable comedy series that aired on ABC. In this show, Elam portrayed a rough-edged, long-lost father who suddenly reappears in the lives of his children after the death of their mother. The story centered on Zach's unconventional attempt to raise 4 children he barely knew, which gave Elam an opportunity to showcase both his comedic timing and his ability to play a character who, despite his flaws, had a surprising amount of heart. Although the series lasted for only 8 episodes, it was notable for pairing Elam with future stars such as Mark Hamill, who would go on to worldwide fame as Luke Skywalker in Star Wars, and Gary Busey. Even though The Texas Wheelers struggled with low ratings and was quickly canceled, critics admired Elam's performance, noting that his rugged persona and eccentric screen presence added a unique layer to the family-centered comedy. Elam continued experimenting with unusual roles on television, demonstrating a willingness to step outside the gritty Western and villainous typecasting that had defined much of his earlier career. In 1979, he appeared in the CBS sitcom Struck by Lightning, taking on the unexpected part of Frankenstein's monster. This quirky comedy revolved around a scientist who discovers that his ancestor was Dr. Frankenstein and, through a series of comic events, ends up living with the monster. Elam, with his distinctive facial features and offbeat charm, was a natural fit for such a peculiar role, blending humor with the absurdity of playing a legendary horror figure in a light-hearted sitcom. Unfortunately, the show never found its audience and was canceled after just 3 episodes, with the remaining 8 episodes left unaired in the United States. Interestingly, all 11 episodes eventually aired in the United Kingdom in 1980, giving British audiences a chance to see Elam's unusual comedic turn, which remains something of a curiosity in his long career. Even in the 1990s, Elam continued to make appearances that highlighted his versatility. He took on the role of Hick Peterson in a first-season episode of the hugely popular sitcom Home Improvement. The episode, titled Birds of a Feather Flock to Taylor, Season 1, Episode 20, gave Elam the chance to share the screen with another Hollywood legend, Ernest Borgnine. The storyline revolved around eccentric characters and their humorous interactions with Tim Allen's Taylor family, and Elam's performance reminded viewers that his comedic instincts were still sharp. For audiences who remembered him as a menacing outlaw in westerns, seeing Elam bring laughter to a modern family sitcom highlighted just how broad his acting range truly was. On the big screen, Elam further cemented his reputation for eccentric comedy with his role as Dr. Nicholas Van Helsing, a self-described crazed proctologist in the 1981 action comedy blockbuster The Cannonball Run. The film, directed by Hal Needham and featuring an all-star cast that included Burt Reynolds, Dom DeLuise, and Farrah Fawcett, was a rollicking cross-country car race filled with slapstick humor and outrageous characters. Elam's performance as the eccentric doctor stood out as one of the film's most offbeat highlights, showcasing his gift for turning even the smallest role into something memorable. So well received was his portrayal that Elam reprised the role 3 years later in the sequel, Cannonball Run 2, 1984. Once again delighting audiences with his wild-eyed antics and comedic unpredictability. In 1986, Elam appeared in The Aurora Encounter, a film often categorized as a weird Western because of its unusual blending of Western themes with science fiction. In this production, Elam played Charlie Hankins, a town drunk whose eccentric behavior contributed to the film's offbeat tone. It was during the making of this movie that Elam experienced one of the most profound personal connections of his life. On set, he met Mickey Hayes, an 11-year-old Texas boy who suffered from progeria, a rare condition that causes rapid aging. Despite their differences in age and life circumstances, Elam and Hayes formed an extraordinary bond. Their friendship was later documented in the 1987 film I Am Not a Freak, which showed how deeply the two cared for each other and how Elam's warmth and humanity shone through off-screen just as brightly as his charisma did on-screen. Elam once remarked in what may be an apocryphal but widely repeated quote, "You know, I've met a lot of people, but I've never met anybody that got next to me like Mickey." The relationship revealed a tender and compassionate side to Elam that audiences rarely saw in his tough guy roles. That same year, Elam expanded his television resume once again by co-starring in the comedy series Easy Street. He played Alvin Bully Stevenson, the down-on-his-luck uncle of Lonnie Anderson's character, L.K. McGuire. The show focused on an unlikely living arrangement in which a wealthy socialite, played by Anderson, shares her lavish home with her blue-collar relatives, creating plenty of comedic conflict. Elam's character, with his bumbling yet endearing qualities, was a natural source of humor. Although Easy Street was short-lived, Elam's presence helped elevate the sitcom, and his pairing with Anderson provided audiences with a fun dynamic between Hollywood glamour and rough-edged charm. In 1988, Elam teamed up with country music legend Willie Nelson in the made-for-television Western movie Where the Hell's That Gold? The film, which also starred Delta Burke, was a comedic Western romp involving a treasure hunt, double crosses, and larger-than-life characters. Elam's role allowed him to return to familiar Western territory, but with the comedic twist that had become one of his trademarks. His chemistry with Nelson added to the film's appeal, as both men brought a relaxed, easygoing energy to their performances. Elam's long and distinguished career received formal recognition in 1994 when he was inducted into the Hall of Great Western Performers at the National Cowboy and Western Heritage Museum in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. This honor placed him alongside some of the most respected names in the history of Western film and television. The induction was a fitting tribute to an actor who had not only defined himself through unforgettable villainous and comic performances, but had also contributed to the enduring legacy of the Western genre. For fans and colleagues alike, Elam's recognition in the Hall of Great Western Performers served as a testament to his versatility, longevity, and the indelible mark he left on American entertainment. When people think of Jack Elam, they often remember his signature lazy eye, his grizzled face, and his ability to steal nearly any scene he was in, whether as a villain in a Western or as a comedic old-timer later in his career. But behind the scenes, Elam was known as a man who spoke his mind without hesitation. He had strong opinions about nearly everyone he ever worked with, and one actor who particularly rubbed him the wrong way was none other than Gary Cooper, the legendary star of classic Hollywood westerns and dramas. Gary Cooper was celebrated as one of the greatest screen icons of his generation. He was famous for his quiet dignity, his understated style, and his ability to convey strength with just a few words. To many, he was the very definition of a Western hero. But to Jack Elam, Cooper represented almost everything he disliked about Hollywood's golden age leading men. Elam believed that Cooper had been overrated and that his supposed natural acting was little more than, as Elam once said, standing around and mumbling while everyone else did the work. Elam would often tell stories in interviews or on film sets about his less than flattering experiences with Cooper. "Gary Cooper never impressed me," Elam reportedly said. "He was always just there. You'd have these great character actors carrying a scene, giving everything they had, and Cooper would just mutter a line in that low voice of his, and the critics would call it brilliant. I never saw brilliance. I saw a guy who got by on looking good in a cowboy hat." Part of Elam's disdain came from what he considered Cooper's lack of work ethic. While Elam himself worked tirelessly to perfect even small roles, often showing up on set early and staying late to go over dialogue, he claimed that Cooper coasted on his star power. "If you asked me who I thought was lazy, I'd say Gary Cooper without blinking," Elam once remarked. "He didn't rehearse. He didn't push himself. He didn't care if the scene sparkled. He just wanted to get through it and collect the paycheck. Meanwhile, the rest of us were sweating blood trying to make it all work." Elam also had strong feelings about the way Cooper treated others on set. While Cooper had a reputation among many as polite and reserved, Elam saw him differently. "People said he was a gentleman," Elam noted. "Maybe if you were a studio head or a pretty actress. But if you were just some working character guy like me, he didn't bother with you. He barely acknowledged you. I've got no respect for that." For a man like Elam, who prided himself on being approachable and friendly to everyone from the biggest star to the stagehand, this kind of aloofness was unforgivable. Perhaps most infuriating to Elam was the way Cooper was lionized by critics and audiences even when, in Elam's view, he gave lifeless performances. Elam thought Cooper's Academy Award for High Noon was one of the most undeserved in film history. "You could have put a cigar store Indian in that role and gotten the same performance," Elam scoffed. "But because it was Cooper, everybody bowed down. I never understood it," Elam, being blunt as ever, once summarized his feelings by saying, "Gary Cooper was like wallpaper. He was there, he filled the space, but you didn't notice him unless someone told you to. And yet somehow he became this giant of cinema. To me, that says more about Hollywood's obsession with looks than with talent." Despite his criticisms, Elam acknowledged that Cooper had his devoted fans and that his image as the tall, stoic cowboy was something the public craved. But that didn't stop Elam from expressing his discontent. "He was the American hero, sure," Elam admitted, "but only because people wanted to believe in that image. He wasn't the best actor, not by a long shot. He wasn't even the best actor in most of his movies, but he looked the part, and that was enough for the studios." In the end, Jack Elam's dislike of Gary Cooper was rooted in his lifelong frustration with Hollywood's tendency to glorify leading men while overlooking the gritty, hard-working character actors who gave films their soul. To Elam, Cooper symbolized that imbalance, the unfairness of a system that rewarded looks and aura over depth and sweat. And for a man like Jack Elam, who built his career on sheer determination and an unshakable work ethic, that was something he could never forgive. Jack Elam was married twice, first to Jean Louise Hodgert from 1937 until her death from colon cancer on January 24, 1961. 7 months later, in 1961, August 1961, Elam married again, then to Margaret M. Jennison. The couple remained together for 42 years, until October 20, 2003, when Jack died of congestive heart failure at their home in Ashland, Oregon.